What is biodiversity? Biodiversity is a term which describes every living organism within a single ecosystem or habitat, including numbers and diversity of species in all environmental aspects such as temperature, oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, and climate. Biodiversity can be measured globally or in smaller settings such as span. Ang biodiversity ay ang pagkakaiba-iba at pagiging natatangi ng bawat organismong matatagpuan sa ating daigdig. Kinakatawan nito ang lahat ng may buhay katulad ng mga hayop, halaman, fungi at microorganism. What is ecosystem? An ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscapes, work together to form a bubble of life. Ecosystem contain biotic or living parts as well as abiotic factors or non-living parts. Biotic factors include plants, animals, and other organisms. Every factor in an ecosystem depends on every other factor, either directly or indirectly. A change in the temperature of an ecosystem will often affect what plants will grow there. For instance, animals that depend on plants for food and shelter will have to adapt to the changes, move to another ecosystem, or perish. Understanding biodiversity within the context of ecosystem needs a true study on the relationship of the biotic, living organisms, and the abiotic, the non-living organisms. We as human inhabitants of the ecosystem must preserve and conserve the biodiversity of all creatures. Saklaw din ng biodiversity ang tinatawag na ecosystem gaya ng mga kagubatan, kabundukan, ilog, karagatan at maging ang mga kapaligirang gawang tao tulad ng mga bukirin o sakahan. Ang ecosystem ay binubuo ng mga kombinasyon at ugnayan ng mga buhay na organismo at di buhay na bagay sa daigdig tulad ng lupa, dagat, sikat ng araw, klima at iba pa.
The loss of biodiversity is a serious threat. But why is biodiversity important? And why should this one particular species be protected? Biodiversity is life, with all those different plants and animals, and that keeps each other beautifully in balance. But if you remove one block, and another block, the tower becomes more and more unstable, and eventually it falls over. When an ecosystem collapses, nature no longer functions. Important functions are lost, such as water purification by the soil, CO2 storage by trees, temperature regulation by vegetation, and the natural habitat for species disappears. A collapsed system can have major consequences. More extreme weather conditions, such as erosion and flooding. In addition, it is very difficult to regain all biodiversity. Rebuilding a tower takes a long time and requires a lot of knowledge. That is why biodiversity is so important. That's why we have to be careful about it.
What does biodiversity means for human health? People depend on biodiversity in their daily lives in ways that are not always apparent or appreciated. Human health ultimately depends upon ecosystem, product, and service such as availability of fresh water, food, and fuel sources, which are requisite for good human health and productive livelihood. Can you count all the ways biodiversity supports global health? Here are just a few. Biodiversity provides the clean air we breathe. It purifies the water we drink. It limits the outbreak and spread of infection disease. It arms us with the traditional and modern medicine we use to heal. It supplies the variety of food and essential nutrients that fuels our lives and ensure our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. But biodiversity is under threat from deforestation, pollution, and other human activity. Biodiversity loss affect the health of living things including people. It can provoke infection disease outbreaks, limit the discovery and development of medicine, compromise food security, nutrition, and livelihood, especially for vulnerable populations. It put all the communities at risk by driving exacerbating climate change. The world is responding with the policies, plan, and strategy that address the link between health and biodiversity, including the One Health approach. One Health recognizes that human health depends on plants and animal health and healthy ecosystem. It brings together different sectors to address the common threat whose biodiversity impact our health. There are too many ways to count. but one thing's for sure. If we take care of nature will take care of us. Weather versus climate change. Weather can change within a few minutes of hour. Climate change take a very long time to change. Example of weather. It's pouring outside. That is describing the weather because it's explaining what's happening in right here and right now. Phrasing. That is the weather too. The wind is really blowing. That is a weather. Such a foggy night. That is a weather too. Finally, it's hot today. That also describing the weather. The weather can be anything on any given day.
We'll talk about shortly, weather can fluctuate greatly. For example, in January in New York City, it's generally cold. But on any given day in January, we could have 75 or 80 degree Fahrenheit weather in New York. It would be strange, but that's the weather. It's a snapshot of what's happening right here, right now.
For example of climate change. It's hot and humid in the Amazon. That is the example climate. It's not always hot and humid in the Amazon, but the average that is your expectation of there. The South Pole is extremely cold and dry. Generally that's true, but the shorter day is not true. The Sahara is arid, generally very arid and dry, but not raining time to time. Weather, what's happening outside, right here or right now. Climate, what's usually happening here during this time of year. Weather is affected by a lot of different things. This is all the different factors that giving you symptoms, what's happening in your locations for this moment. This including temperature, wind condition, humidity, cloud cover, precipitations, air pressure. Climate is affected by latitude, proximity to water, mountain ranges, elevations, ocean currents, wind pressures belt. When we refer to climate change, we are talking about a change in climate patterns attributed largely to the increased levels of carbon dioxide produced by use of fossil fuel. These are slow changes that are generally seen when looking at long-term trends, not at day-to-day weather conditions.
Climate change has become a huge issue lately, to the point where it's not only rocking the world of science, but politics as well. Yet, many people are still unaware of what climate change is and what some of the potential implications are. So in this video, we'll be going over the basic concept of climate change. The sun's rays take roughly 8 minutes to travel that 93 million mile distance to Earth, where it will light up our beautiful skies. The thing is that the sun doesn't just release those golden rays of light we see in the morning. It releases radiation in other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, like UV or the infrared radiation we feel in the form of heat. Sometimes the emitted infrared radiation will be reflected back into space when it hits Earth, but other times that reflected infrared radiation can be trapped by a layer of gas in our atmosphere called greenhouse gases, which typically consist of water vapor, methane, nitrous oxide, and most infamously carbon and carbon dioxide. Imprisoned by that pesky greenhouse gas, the infrared radiation has nowhere else to go and remains on Earth, where it begins to heat up the planet, a phenomenon we have come to call global warming. Global warming can have many implications. For example, it can melt glaciers, which can result in sea levels rising. It can also cause more evaporation, leading to more precipitation, which can change the weather patterns in certain areas, causing it to become wetter or drier. This change in overall weather patterns in certain regions is called climate change. Climate change isn't just wreaking havoc via droughts and rising sea levels. In Siberia, for example, the permafrost is now thawing out and may potentially release many bacteria and viruses that are trapped inside. Of course, that's just one of the many problems we're facing now. In our climate change series, we'll be taking a look at the more complicated consequences of climate change, as well as some of the solutions scientists are working on to give our blue rock a second chance. So, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and most importantly, don't forget to stay tuned for more science videos.